Alright, mashallah, we got some wild turkeys over here. Turkey, turkey. Gobble, gobble. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. So, we're continuing our deep dive into all my notes concerning the radical feminist philosophy. The RadFems is what they're called in short. And what's important about this group of individuals is how influential they are on the American form of feminism and online. So, this means that as believers, we should be prepared so that we can deal with them accordingly whenever their ideology pops up, or we find ourselves engaged in a conversation with someone like that, or we find our family members becoming like them, you name it. So, my notes, and one of them that I want to discuss, one of the little bullet points, was the issue of emotional labor. Now, emotional labor is something you hear a lot of women complain about, but also men. They say, oh, I'm your emotional tampon. I hear this in the MGTOW movement. And we also hear with women that they don't like someone who isn't emotionally intelligent and doesn't fulfill their emotional needs. Women oftentimes in the RadFem movement will get mad if you say women are emotional, but if you look at their rhetoric, you'll see they mention emotions quite a lot. So emotional labor has to deal with managing emotions, suppressing emotions, and expressing emotions, all while fulfilling expectations of a certain role or situation to benefit others, to maintain social norms. Okay? That's the first part. So, this to me just sounds like emotional regulations. Yes, part of being a functioning adult is that you don't fly off the handle. You know how to regulate yourself. You know how to maintain composure. You know how to deal with the ups and downs of life and the nuances of conversation with smoothness, or so we hope. So, what you can picture here is a woman, the way that they're framing it, has to suppress a lot of her emotions that are flying off the handle and fuming at her husband. Now, I find it quite telling that these women are almost advocating for women to not have that requirement of emotional control. They would get really afraid if a man wasn't able to maintain his emotions. If he was always angry, flying off the handle, if he was emotional and crying all the time, this would create a problem. Okay? So I find it fascinating that the women want the men to be in control of their emotions, to bottle stuff up a lot, and then on the other hand, want women to be able to just say every single thought that comes into their head when it deals with them being pissed off or irritated, and not realizing this will lead to a lot of combativeness within the relationship. And that would turn her into like a nagging wraith, a sort of nagging wench who her husband will always want to escape, and he'll find ways to escape so that he can just deal with the relationship. So when they talk about emotional labor, they're talking about just how you can face difficulties within a relationship and how you're supposed to put on a smiling face. Smile now, cry later atmosphere within your home, and that is not very welcoming. That's not very sustainable, which I can understand. But this is one of their digs at marriage. And remember, the RadFems glorify careerism. They want you to be in the economy, being with men, and the funniest part is, do they not realize how many women have to do emotional labor at work? You think you can just tell your boss anything you want? Your coworker? What is HR for? HR constantly is like, well, Courtney felt that your presence there and what you said was inappropriate, and I'm gonna have to give you a write-up, and da 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 da. How many people get called into HR for trivial things because somebody's fifis were hurt? Someone's feelings, or somebody didn't like how you worded it, you name it, right? And then you, as an individual, have to manage that. You have to be able to say, you know what, I was pulled into HR. I can't just punch the HR person in the face and go scream at my coworker and tell them they're nuts and that they don't need to always, go to HR whenever there's a dispute or something, right? But again, you're going to have to play the part. You're going to have to play the part. And when you don't play the part, that's when you're going to run into trouble. Let me give you an example. So, when I was a server, I was exhausted always having to smile when my natural disposition is more stoic, it's more serious. Some call it a resting bitch face. They have their own nicknames for it. But I'm not super bubbly, and some jobs they really want you to be that fake bubbly, and that just feels like soul sucking. It feels like you're held hostage. And now that I'm a stay-at-home mom, I don't have to put on that performance, and I'm more free. You see, the feminists will say, like, oh, don't be a stay-at-home mom. You're doing unpaid labor. You're depending on a man. You're not living up to your full potential. You should be more individualistic, more autonomous. Don't be socially and economically tied to a man. You should be out working. The child care is entrapping you. Yada, yada, yada. And then that would put me back into being what I'm good at, which is the customer service realm, which actually requires me to do more emotional labor and than I would at home. But there's going to be days where your husband irritates you. And I know some women hate hearing this, but when they're on their menses, you just feel more irritated. But that's just part of life. There's going to be days where your kids irritate you. You really can't avoid irritation. You can't avoid just problems. And you deal with them as they come, right? But the RadFems make emotional labor sound like it only occurs within marriage and a heterosexual relationship. And I disagree with that framing, because if you look at the domestic violence rate amongst lesbians and the divorce rate amongst lesbians, it's quite high. And so, if the lesbian relationship was so perfect and women were so perfect, why is it that they can't really get along, right? And I'm sure there's, plenty of examples for heterosexual dysfunctionality and lesbian dysfunctionality, but recall, in another video I did, the RadFems argue that heterosexuality is a form of oppression and patriarchal control. That's why I bring it up. So they consistently try to frame everything negative about heterosexual marriages. And I see this online, on X in particular. You'll see them say like, oh, there's so much baggage in heterosexual relationships. Oh, there's so much XYZ in heterosexual relationships. Just notice it, okay? You can kind of see what they're up to. But if you said the opposite, you'd probably get banned. You get censored, fired from your job. So we do know that there's like a one-sided critique, or you're only allowed to put the microscope, the magnifying glass, upon heterosexuals, at least socially speaking, unless you be called some other word and then you can't get a job because you've been labeled and shamed publicly. Cancel culture and whatnot. Now, I want you to recall, it's all while fulfilling expectations of a certain role or situation. So, if you're gonna marry a certain man and he has a lot of dinner parties with his coworkers, or he has to network like a politician's wife, you're gonna have to play that emotional labor more than someone whose husband works construction and people don't really come over. So you can manage emotional labor by picking a certain spouse that meets your literal mood standards. You have a threshold. So you need someone who's going to be able to work within your comfort zone and you in theirs, right? I couldn't imagine how horrible it is to be a politician's wife and just have to smile all day and wave. And having to pretend you care about things you don't. And having your every move dictated. A lot of women call themselves queens, but they do not have the emotional labor capacity of a queen. I bet you Queen Elizabeth, the old lady who died, right, of England, Elizabeth II, I think. Without a doubt, I bet you she had moments where she was just like exhausted from playing the princess part and then the queen part. And for years, she has to put on a face. She has to play the queen part. You don't see her freaking out in public. I mean, look how Cardi B behaves, and then look how the queen behaved. So it's fascinating that some of the most ratchet, ghetto, nasty, trailer trash women will call themselves goddesses when they're super jive, they're combative, snarky, nasty, unpleasant, uncouth, all that jazz. And they'll call themselves a queen when queens actually handle the most emotional labor historically. Isn't that something? And we should remind ourselves that the higher you go up the socioeconomic ladder, the more emotional labor you're going to be doing. That you're going to have like a mask on, essentially, in order to navigate social situations that are uncomfortable. And that's part of being an adult. You can't fly off the handle. When you see emotionally unregulated people and they get mad at like a cashier and they start throwing things at the cashier, or they attack the register and throw it on the ground, they don't know how to handle their emotions in that situation, and they don't want to do emotional labor, so they lash out and make everyone miserable around them, and they destabilize the environment. So women have to have emotional labor, as do adult men in particular, right? Stoicism. You have to have that because that's how you keep things smooth. And my mom has bipolar disorder, and she is very difficult to handle when she has an episode. So she's not able to handle any type of emotional labor. So she can't manage her emotions. She's wears her emotions on her sleeve. Suppressing emotions for her, unheard of. And she expresses all of her emotions. And this leads to a lot of rage, a lot of screaming, shouting, insulting, and unsafeness. And she has to get medicated. And then she becomes a zombified person because she's just pilled up, right, to the gills. And so you can see how the RadFems are really out of touch with reality. Because if you can't do emotional labor properly and learn how to manage your stress and know how to read the context of your situation, then you're going to have a problem. For example, you got to know how to leave it at the door. Let's go deep. So, for example, what you display versus what one feels. If you're a nurse, you're having a hard time, and then you just wear your emotions on your sleeve and you let go of your professionalism, and then you say things you shouldn't to a patient or behave in a way in which you shouldn't, you can traumatize that individual against nurses forever. And I'm sure many of you have had experiences like myself where a nurse was so unprofessional, you're just like, you're lucky you were in a hospital, because you're as a, how do you put it? It's like the patient has more control than the nurse. The nurse is unable to control her tongue, which is wagging because of her emotions, and her emotions are running high for other reasons, but she's taking it out on the patient. And the patient is just trying to survive, trying to get out of the hospital, trying to deal with what they have to deal with. And if you get a bad nurse who doesn't maintain professionalism, then you can see how they need to regulate their emotional behavior, and they need to have a higher threshold for emotional labor. They need to manage their emotions, suppress certain emotions. Suppression of emotions in certain contexts and arenas and moments of life is definitely needed, because not everyone deserves to be subjected to your mental tornado. They don't deserve to have to deal with that blowback and your personal issues. You can't hold people hostage with your emotions. People shouldn't walk on eggshells to appease you, especially if you're in a work setting. Okay? So, when they talk about emotional labor negatively within a relationship, I would just bring up to them, hey, listen, you're going to have emotional labor at work all the time. Countless women. And you can cut off so much stress of emotional labor that leads you to feeling burnt out and overworked and bitter by being a stay-at-home mom. You're going to have your children, if you have a high-stress job where you're always suppressing your emotions, and then when you come through the door, you're finally able to be yourself, you let out your anger on your kids, you're going to be more short-tempered, your kids deserve you at your best. And your work will run you down and you suck it up for your paycheck. But with your family, it's harder to do because there's not that economic incentive. So that's when you have to really regulate your priorities. The RadFems, they'll talk about unpaid domestic labor. They always want to be paid for stuff. They want to be paid to do housework. They want to be paid for maternal care. And now they say, well, it's hard to get married because you have to do emotional labor with your husband. Meanwhile, what do you have some of these feminists say on podcasts? Oh, we want our men to open up more and show their emotions. So which is it? Do you want them to open up and show emotions, and this leads to you having to have more emotional labor requirements? Or do you want him to deal with his emotions on his own time so that you have less emotional labor to do? Which is it? So the RadFem is consistently contradicting themselves, being a massive hypocrite. For example, if a RadFem says, oh, I cheated because he wasn't fulfilling my emotional needs, they'll be like, oh, slay queen, you're right, you have to do what's right for you, get yours, there's better out there, leave him, he couldn't handle you, and then suddenly when it comes to like him having a bad day, or he was rude, now you don't want to suppress your emotions, now you want to overly express your emotions, and then you're unable to manage that expression and you say things you shouldn't, which damage the relationship, and now you are more resentful towards each other and want a divorce. A lot of women, when they're angry, they think about divorce. It's very common. I was even watching a Chinese show, and it has English subtitles, and it's like this woman was unhappy in her marriage, and she was just quite a mean woman with a very weak husband who was always catering to her feelings, and she would just, throughout the show, there was an internal dialogue where she's like hating her husband, and he's not a bad guy. He's a little weak, but he's not bad. But whenever there was an issue, divorce, she wants a divorce. And it was really over small things. It was called I'm Married But ... something like that. A weird title. But it's all in Chinese. And she's like a video editor or something. And her husband is like a computer engineer or something like that. And so it deals with their relationship within the Chinese culture. And I just thought it was fascinating how that man is dealing with his wife's abusive emotional demands, but she isn't able to regulate hers, and she suppresses her feelings a lot because they live with the mom. So she's unable to kind of dig into the mom as she wants because of culture, and she doesn't dig in to her husband as much as she would like, and she suppresses a lot of emotions. And I found that to be very unhealthy, where, you know, if you can't just have open communication to have it as a form of catharsis and a pressure release valve, I think you got some issues there. But there are some people who you can tell your problems to, your husband or something, and they don't really change or fix it. Then I can understand if that pressure builds, but it is up to you in the end to find a way to let that energy out and stick it out for the kids. Now, your kids are grown, and you want to say, you know what, it's not worth it anymore, that's up to you. But I think while your kids are small, they want to have a mom and dad around, and you have to treat life differently. Because the emotional labor that is required for social norms is there, and social norms exist oftentimes for very good reasons. And few cultures allow you to just get buck wild because you're having a bad day. So it's really scary when you think about it. Now, another one of my notes here says, an imbalance in emotional labor leads to exhaustion and burnout. So sometimes you have to just not engage with the individual. They're acting annoying. You feel burned to a crisp. You just can't handle them anymore. That's where hobbies come in. That's where you need to find a way to rejuvenate yourself outside that person's vampiric energy. Right? They're bringing you down. You want to say something so salty that it makes it so the soil becomes unusable, right? But you're like, no, that's not sustainable, because some wounds don't heal, and some things cannot be undone, they cannot be unsaid. So you have to suppress some of those things and let that energy get out. Otherwise you're going to have more chest pains, headache, insomnia. It can be a definite problem. And sometimes you just have to wait till the better moment to discuss what the issue was, instead of exploding with anger and having a huge fight in front of your kids or in front of the neighbors or you name it, right? So to avoid exhaustion and burnout is really important, but work burns women out faster and leads them to exhaustion more than marriage, I'd argue. I've had plenty of horrible managers, and how many women have recorded videos crying in their car about how much they work and how exhausted they are, and that they just feel tired, like a depleted balloon. Something to think about, right? So we shouldn't allow the RadFems to frame work as glorified and marriage as a prison without proper rebuttals. Fake emotions can make you feel alienated from yourself. And if you're always surface acting and not able to be authentic, that causes a problem. You know, there was this mall in Santa Rosa that was selling Disney products. Went there with my husband and we went in, checked it out. It was a dying mall. So I was like, oh, let's see what's in here. It's like going to it's a fading place. You just want to see what's still there. And it's pretty empty, the mall. And there was a Disney woman at the cashier spot, and she just kept smiling, like, eh, and you're just like, this person's held hostage. And my husband said something to her like, oh, yeah, I can't remember the words exactly, but he said some comment. But clearly she's not allowed to go off script. She can't just be herself. She has to perform that Disney role and stay within that framework. And you could just see in her eyes, like, she's like, and I was like, just leave her alone. Have a great day. And then took the bag, got a cup. It was that teacup from Beauty and the Beast called Chip. And, you know, it's like a cup. I was like, oh, just get a little teacup. Boring mall. And what's interesting about that is how I could clearly see that that woman, she's not allowed to really be herself. She has to do a role. You know? Just like a hostess in a restaurant. Hello everyone, welcome. What do you want, the window or do you want the patio? Okay. You know, she's not allowed to say like, sit wherever you want, I don't give a damn. She can't do that or she'll be fired. So you're gonna have surface acting within your job, because that's part of the performance duties, right? You know, nurses that fail to do that, that don't know how to just get in the zone, should retire. I've encountered too many burnout nurses who have no filter, and their energy just feels evil. And you're like, I don't want this lady around me, get the hell out of here. And then you meet some nurses who have embraced their job and they know how to have that conversation with themselves that this patient doesn't want to be here, and this patient is probably suffering in more ways than one, and I don't need to add to that suffering. I'm here to alleviate worry and anxiety and help medically and whatnot. And some nurses will tell you like, oh, we're here for your emotional needs if you need to cry or something, and it's like, no, you're not. That's what family's for. It would be very awkward to cry with a nurse, because she'd be like, I got other patients to go to. I mean, one of the coldest things the nurse said to me, I had a nurse say this to me the first time I had a C-section with like my middle child, and I just kind of let them bully me because it was so painful to walk. My baby was in the NICU getting a jaundice treatment. All my kids have had jaundice. And I wanted to be pushed in the wheelchair because it hurt, because I was on floor 6. I need to go to floor 3. And you're wearing your hospital robe, and my feet are so swollen I have to wear those hospital socks of the biggest size, and it still hurts. And I just want to sit down, and I don't want to be in an elevator with strangers by myself. You know, there's a lot of paranoia there. You're feeling very vulnerable and unhealthy, and you smell like blood, and you're like, it's just uncomfortable. And I'd rather be pushed and have a medical personnel with me, but they're like, we have other patients to tend to, there's no one to go with you. And it's their job to take me. Like, the doctors would be like, or the head nurses would be like, oh, just press the call button and someone will take you to visit your baby. He talked to the NICU representative, I'm not sure what they're called. And he talked to the lactation consultant. They'd say, yeah, you can go down there and nurse your baby, just press the call button and someone will take you, right? But then they bullied me into not bothering the overworked nurses, even though it's their job to take me, right? And so this time I was like, nope. And my eldest, she's a teenager, but she's not 18, and she's not 16. When she tried to take me, the hospital said, sorry, no one under the age of 16 is allowed in the NICU because regulations. I said, okay, so she can't even push me in there, take me to the incubator that my child's in, and then wait for me outside? They said, nope. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And then since my toddler was there, my husband had to stay in the hospital room with my toddler and teen, because no one under 16 can be left alone in the hospital room without an adult. And I'm like, okay, so the two options I have, okay, so my teen can't bring me, my husband can't bring me, and now you're telling me a nurse can't bring me. And I'm sorry, when I go to stand up, it's painful, it hurts. I had freaking surgery here. Okay, I need a wheelchair. And so I pressed the button. I'm like, I'm ready for someone to take me. And that they had med students that day. And they're like, well, we can't take you, so we can have a med student take you. I was like, that's fine. And he didn't know where he was going. And I had to direct him, but I was happy that at least someone took me. And then I was more firm later on, being like, no, someone's going to take me to see my baby in the NICU, and I'm not going to force my body to do something uncomfortable because you don't want to push me down there or pick me up. And it doesn't take too much effort to push me in the wheelchair. Okay, it takes a lot more effort for me to walk by myself. And what happens if I fall and slip? Like, hospital liability, people. Okay? Hello, what if I faint? Who knows what can happen? What if someone assaults me? Come on, man, it's super creepy, you know? No way. Hello, push me to the freaking NICU. It's your job. So I can't just be totally rude to the nurses, you see? I had to have emotional labor with nurses who have no capacity for emotional labor at times, you see? So it's fascinating to hear this conversation because there will be moments in your life where you're more professional than the person you're speaking to. And the person you're speaking to is actually supposed to be able to do more than you emotionally, right? And so it's really, I mean, there's so many examples I could think of where nurses couldn't even have surface level acting. They couldn't even fake their emotions and remain professional, and how uncomfortable and unpleasant it is to interact with such individuals when you are in a vulnerable, weakened medical state. Because it feels very threatening and intimidating, and that's why I think it's really important for when you're in the hospital to have people around you who love you, who can defend you, because there's going to be nurses who they are burnt and should retire, and they're going to find ways to be bullies to you, quite honestly. And so remember, when a RadFem is like, oh, you know, relationships are too much emotional labor, men are too much emotional labor, we have to be their therapist, understand that there's countless women who want their husband to fulfill their emotional needs, and in the workplace have to have a super high expectation of their mental composure, right? So don't let the RadFem confuse you on managing yourself. And remember, as Muslims, we're told constantly, have patience. Have patience. And that's hard to do sometimes, no doubt. And there's going to be situations where you fail miserably. But the point is that you recognize that you failed and you try again. And there's going to be times where you're like, dang man, you had some good patience there. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. So don't be too hard on yourself to the point where you can't recognize your wins, right? Now, how does this all tie into mothers? Well, RadFems, they don't like how mothers are expected to perform emotional labor, emotional care at the cost of their own needs. So again, I pointed out how RadFems are deeply selfish. They don't like the self-sacrificing mother imagery. And I always found that to be quite despicable, because a baby, they're helpless. They need help. Okay? Your toddler is having a meltdown because they want the green apple instead of the red apple. You know, it's gonna be a problem. You know, sometimes it's not gonna make any sense. You just have to be like, you know what? This is absurd, and I don't know what to do. You know, there's times where my newborn is crying. Well, he's out of the newborn stage technically, because once you're past 4 weeks, you're not a newborn anymore, they say. But a little one, he's crying, and the toddler's crying, and you're just dealing with both crying. And you're like, what is happening here? You know, so you gotta have patience, because you're like, okay, what do you need? Okay, you want a little bag of raisins? Get you some raisins. Okay, let's burp the baby, see he's okay. He's fed, okay. Diapers, check, fine. Okay, what do we do? Tummy time. There's always this problem solving that happens. And I'll be tired. Like, I wish I could just, alright, you guys deal with it. Imaginary maids. And then I just go and sleep, which I need. But I can't do that. So I have to put their needs before mine. How many moms, you're sleeping and then the baby wakes up and you're like, oh, this pillow is so comfortable. Just 5 more minutes. But you're like, I can't. Gotta get up. Come on, the little one needs me. My needs of sleep are put on the back burner for the baby. And that's why it's so important to try to find ways to get sleep, but to know when you can't sleep, but things got to get done. There's that balance every day, and things get easier. You know, time does fly, so you're gonna get past that stage. You know, so again, there's like, okay, I have the needed a shower. Okay, husband, you watch the children while I shower. Boom, handle it, right? So, but there will be days where maybe he's working double and he's not home, and you don't want to take a shower while the baby screams their head off, bloody murder, because you're like, you're not able to relax, and it would be actually more relaxing to just be smelly and hold the baby as they don't cry. You see? So the need of showering versus the need of your ears to not hear a screaming baby because you don't have the help you need. You know, there's a balance. So you may have the need to say, oh, I want to go to the beach, but you got to take the kids to school. They have their needs, and you need to put them before you. You see what I'm saying? That's what mothers do. And if you ever had a mother who didn't put you first, then you would be like, these RadFems are insane for advocating for more selfishness. They shouldn't shame the selfless mother. They should embrace it, just like traditional patriarchal people do. Because, for example, my grandma, she never made me breakfast before school. She never walked me to the bus stop. She never was at the bus stop when I get home from school. She never really ask me about school. She didn't brush my hair in the morning. She really gave up after like first, second grade until I like left home. Like, she just did not engage at all. And that type of neglect, where she chose to sleep during the day and be up all night, to barely speak to me, to not really make sure I was clean, to not make sure I was safe, to not talk to me about what's happening at school, is a form of neglect so intense that it'll leave a scar forever, and there's no way it can be healed. You just have to keep going and not think of it. And ironically, suppress that emotions to a point where you can function. You analyze it, you deal with it, and it passes. But it's a wave that comes and then leaves. You know, you just can't sit there and whine about it while there's things that's got to get done. Right? There's a moment where you take those emotions and you're like, all right, we'll deal with you another day. I thought about you. Now it's time to go put the beans to soak and chop the onions. Stuff like that, right? So the cost of your own needs, there's a balance there. And a baby is helpless and unable to help themselves. And so as a mom, you are in service of others. And that's a beautiful thing, because once a mother doesn't fulfill that role, she traumatizes her children and creates lifelong pain, right? This isn't to say that fathers don't have their roles and what they do, but I'm specifically talking about moms, because they don't like that moms are required to perform that constant emotional care, that constant emotional labor. They think marriage traps women into that patriarchal oppression, and that they don't have to put others before them because they will get exhausted and burnt out. But I'd argue that this is why you keep the families intact. This is why you're careful who you have children with, so that you can have someone who has a decent family, or at least a family that won't cause problems, who doesn't bring drama to your life. Before that would really matter. What kind of family does this person come from? People looked into that. Today they say that's outdated. That type of traditionality is no longer needed. But looking at someone's family situation can really give you a glimpse into what your future could be like if that family merges with yours. Because family gatherings, the genetics you're going to give to your children from their side of the bloodline. Think about it, right? So you can still be authentic and find ways to express yourself in other contexts, right? If the cashier at the supermarket wasn't like, oh, did you find everything you need today? And they were kind of going off script, you'd be like, okay, this is super awkward. I'm just here to get my stuff and go. With some people, you make a connection, you have small talk, but other times it's not appropriate. And you want someone to be able to perform their job and leave emotions at the door, right? It's quite fascinating. And yes, having emotional problems takes a lot of effort to manage, but you have to have that. I mean, you see people have anxiety over everything now, and they're unable to operate, and that creates a huge problem. So I wanted you to just understand, when the RadFems critique men, heterosexual marriages, and relationship roles, duties, and problems, by mentioning the taxing situation of emotional labor, that it isn't as doom and gloom as they say, and you're gonna have to suppress emotions in your job. You're gonna have to watch how you express yourself no matter what, because if you get too much venom, it can really push a lot of people away. And sometimes you can't say something so blunt, and the person needs to hear it, but you're not really prepared for how they're gonna express their emotions in that exchange. So there's so many angles to think about. But when you go through emotional labor, you're fulfilling certain expectations, and sometimes that can be quite annoying. There was the Netflix series, The Empress, and there was this problem of the princess isn't behaving in a princessly manner type of situation, and you can see it from both sides, both from the princess's perspective and both from the mother-in-law's perspective, because she wants to uphold decorum, but the new princess is like, I don't see the point, and yada yada. And then the husband, the king, is the future king, that is, he's, everything's all discombobulated, and now he's fighting with his mom, who wants to uphold traditions, and then he's trying to maintain his marriage with his wife, who's not getting with the groove, she's not assimilating, and whatnot, right? And if she did assimilate, it would benefit the court, the people, but also there would be the common people let down because she's not being more interactive with the people, and some traditions have to go and new traditions must be started. So how someone expresses their emotions can make new traditions or destroy old traditions, and not all old traditions should be gotten rid of, and sometimes new traditions should never be started. So emotional labor is a very vast topic with many nuances and gray areas, but as believers we have adab, and I even struggle with it. I struggle with manners, and it's a lifelong battle, man. I've become better, but it doesn't mean you give up, right? You have to have decorum. You have to have the ability to know when to express and suppress and how to manage your emotions. And customer service people, they're really good at, well, not everyone, but when you're getting yelled at over, I remember there was a guy, what a piece of garbage. He was like, you took too long to get my scone, and now there is none, and you should feel ashamed. And he made a huge scene in the cafe, because when you're managing 6-7 tables, you're getting a drink, you're getting the sauce, you're getting this napkin, you're making sure the busser's gonna refill the iced tea, you're working, right? And we had like a pastry case, and the pastry case, there was access to the people for to go and for other servers, right? So let's say another server, her customer ordered something, she goes, she takes the tongs, she grabs it, she brings it, and there's only a certain amount of pastries. And I saw like a couple of scones. It was like orange scone, blueberry scone, some type of scone. There was a couple there, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna grab that real quick. Let me just set up the plate. You know, there's a ticket here. Okay, this. You know, you're working. I go back to the case of pastries that I needed. All of them are gone. I'm like, oh no, I gotta go to the table and tell them that we're out. I go and tell him that we're out, and the look on his face was if I had just murdered his mom. Like, he had no ability to control his emotional state, and he didn't want me to be the server at the table anymore. And this made me like get in some serious trouble where the boss was like, what happened here? And I'm like, well, I went back to get the patient, he wasn't there, and he didn't like that. And they said, and I got in trouble, and it's like, how's that my fault? You're crazy, you know, like, whatever, like, who cares? He can order a different pastry, okay? You don't get it, pig, like, get over it. But see, the customer's always right, keep the customer happy, you're only as good as your last table, you know, this is very taxing. That piece of garbage. And he hated me ever since then. Like, he would come to eat and he would give me the dirtiest looks, and I'm like, this guy is holding a grudge because he didn't get a pastry one time, because I didn't get it right that second, because I had other duties to make other customers happy, and I'm not an octopus. And if you ask someone else to take your food to your table, sometimes you can get in trouble, you know? They'll be like, oh, Melissa asked me to take her food to the table. Or if you ask a busser, they expect more tips, you know? So you're like, ah, man, I'm already not making that much. I tell the busser to do it, and then he gets in trouble because he's supposed to be doing something else, but I asked him to do a favor for me, now he's not doing his job. And then he can get in trouble for helping me. So, and if I were to ask the manager, like, hey, can you take the person their pastry? The manager would be like, isn't that your job? And it's like, there's really no way you can win. But that guy was such a selfish prick that he couldn't deal with not getting, a scone. And the scone's there, not to insult the pastry chef. It's not that good. You know, her pastries, I was like, this is not. I don't see what the big deal is here. Not to be rude, but I've had some good scones. Her scones, I'm like, yes, it kind of tastes like dried cardboard. But what are you gonna do about it? So I had to maintain emotional control when I really just wanted to take his drink and just dunk it on his head and walk out and quit. What a jerk. What a jerk. So he wasn't able to, but that was a very taxing day. As I'm clocking out, I'm like, can't wait to go home, unwind. That was a very emotionally laborious day. So it's funny with RadFems, they're just like, oh, I can't believe, you have to actually watch what you say to your husband. Like, you have to watch what you say to the customer. Why not your husband? I mean, think about how hurtful you could really be to someone if you never held anything in, you know? Like, I've had some people tell me some insults that it honestly doesn't matter how much they apologize. I'm gonna remember what you said. Like, I can't let it go. Like, what you said was so, like an arrow, like, poof, oh, like you pull the arrow out, man, but the scar is still there. The stitch is healed, but once you see a certain aspect of somebody, you don't really forget that because you know it's always there. It's like, how many people had a snake and they're like, this snake loves me, and then the snake bites them. Oh, I can't believe you did that. Now you look at it differently, right? Or someone has a horse, they love their horse, the horse kicks them, and you're like, oh, that hurts so bad. Now, when you walk behind the horse, you're a little different because you know this horse will kick me, you know? It's just the way life is. Once you know what someone's capable of, you adjust your behavior accordingly. Vice versa, when it comes to relationships. If someone is just raw, unfiltered, they don't care if they hurt your feelings in the relationship, you just lay it on so hard that you're like, oh my gosh, like you're not even giving me the common decency you'd give your boss or a customer. Like, you're really going hard here. And then they come in like 2 hours and they're trying to act like nothing happened, or they try to like say, oh, you want to go eat something, or like they try to move past it, and you move past it technically within the moment, but that pain stays, right? And that's something to think about. So be cautious, my point is, as well, when the RadFem makes it sound like you shouldn't have emotional labor in a relationship, and that you should always be selfish. You should always put your needs first. You shouldn't serve others. You should always expect something in return. And that you should be very cutthroat. That you shouldn't be expected to fulfill certain roles. And that you should always be authentic in moments where you need to be more professional and just be like water on a duck's wing. Just slide right on out. Right? Just keep it moving. Keep it flowing. Like, for example, another example, when you're dealing on the phone with like a problem, the county healthcare that I was forced to go on to because I covered California said we didn't meet the threshold, so we had to get Medi-Cal, and oh my gosh, the bureaucracy, the mistakes that they'd make, like, oh. You gotta call, and then their mistakes make everything harder. And you're like, how can you guys not do your job? You know, what a bunch of idiots. But if I were to fly off on the handle at the person on the phone, they're gonna hang up, they're not gonna do the job. But I have to keep it in and say, hello, how are you? Hi, so there's this problem here, I got this form, and, you know, you wanna lay it on thick and freak out, but that person didn't make the mistake. But you want to vent the frustration, right? But I can't. That's not their fault. I will get more, what's that expression? You get more bees with honey than vinegar, or something like that. If you raise a stink in certain situations, the person shuts off and won't help you. But if you're like, okay, I'm super pissed, but it's not this person's fault. It's not this customer representative's fault. Okay, you know. Now, there are times where something can be messed up. You go to the manager and you be a bit firm to let them know that the customer wasn't pleased. Or if it's the person directly who made the mistake and you're a bit firm, that's a bit different. But, again, emotional labor is something that we practice till the day we die. Right? We gotta be firm. We gotta be smart. Because people are gonna make mistakes, and then we also want grace ourselves. We're gonna make mistakes. Do we always want someone to fly off the handle every time we do something? Screaming in our face, we can feel their spit, you know? Think about it. Women, like these RadFems, they talk about being sort of surface level, having to adhere to social norms, having to be more pleasant or charming and fake emotions and have service acting and whatnot. They don't really realize how sometimes your overreactions emotionally can make the situation worse. Because there's tons of women who they wish a mother effer would, they say. And they are looking like for drama. And if you give them a reason to pop off, they're going to be TNT. And so you're like, no, don't give them a reason to take the muzzle off. Right? Because there's so many people who are just bottling everything up. They haven't managed their emotions. They haven't found a way to have a pressure release valve. Haven't found a way to kind of take their mind off the stress. And then you say something small, and then bam, right? So, and then you gotta manage your emotional labor and all that, trying to deal with them. Isn't that something? So, there's so many nuances in life. And I hope you found this video beneficial, but there were times where I should have kept my mouth shut. And there's times I should have spoke up. And there was times where I should have managed my emotions better. And there was times where I should have filtered what I said. And there was times where I should have been way more direct. in order to nip in the bud a certain behavior. So again, there's that tit for tat in the workplace, the politics of the workplace. Like, you can't imagine how many times some cunty female manager said something and I was just like, oh, I wish I could hit you in the face. You're so freaking rude. Ugh. You're just riding me, man. Grinding me down to dust. And I hate you. But I had to be like, okay, sure, I'll get right to it. It's so funny, man. That's why they're like, oh, your husband, like, you weren't able to just, like, berate him? Oh, you're so harassed. You should, in your marriage, you should totally just, like, dig into him, like, balls to the wall, just let it roar, baby. And you're like, no, that's not, like, a fast way to get divorced. And also, you wouldn't want to be treated like that. What is that saying? Treat others how you want to be treated. Right? We can't always live up to that. But imagine if the husband came home and was like, listen here, you dumb cunt. I had a bad day. Now, you need to just shut your mouth and blah, blah, blah. And they'd be like, oh, I can't believe he talked to me like that. And then next time she does it to him, they would call that a toxic relationship, right? So, man, these RadFems give the worst relationship advice. I can see why I get blocked by so many, honestly. I get blocked by so many RadFems. It's ridiculous. They just don't engage, because when you really analyze their philosophy, like what I'm trying to do here with you, you see the holes. You poke through the holes and you're like, wait a minute, but what if, wait, hold on, let's get this string of reasoning over here and analyze it. And they're like, shut up! They just want to have punchy one-liners, like activist type of tweets, and you're like, wait a minute, let's pull this apart, let's really get to the meat of it, let's expose it raw. Let's look at the bones to see if there's any fracturing, you know, what would stand the weight. It's like they don't want you to inspect their ideas, they don't want you to reflect on their ideas, they want you to have this sort of emotional response to it so that you get a knee-jerk reaction and participate in their movement without really knowing where that heartbeat is going to take you, right? So let me know what you think. I hope you found this beneficial. And now when you hear that expression, emotional labor, you have a greater understanding of what it is. But you can also just ask that person, what do you mean by emotional labor? You know? And how is having emotional labor within your relationship a bad thing? But, you know, how do you operate in the world without emotional labor? When you travel, think about how many of these RadFems, they glorify traveling. Hello, traveling is very stressful. Oh, the taxi didn't pick me up. Oh, this taxi told me the price was this much, but it's actually this much. Damn liars. Or, oh, you know, the hotel, this on the website said it had this, but it really didn't. Like, inconvenience after inconvenience, right, of traveling. So traveling requires emotional labor, alright? So having a stupid dog also does as well. Cats even, they throw up on your carpet, kill the neighbor birds, you know, they're always scratching on something, they're hitting you in the face with their paw. Whatever it is, there's always going to be emotional labor coming from something, right? Take care, everyone. Subhanallah, we got some wild turkeys on the march. Alhamdulillah. Oh, there's two turkeys over there kind of having a spat.